So at the end of 11 weeks, we looked at like lean body mass, we looked at body fat, we looked at hind limb weights. We didn't really see differences in lean body mass, but what we did see was a difference in hind limb weights. It wasn't massive, but there was a significant difference in the size of the muscles of the hind limbs of these animals. And so it's interesting that there wasn't a difference in lean body mass. And what we found, at least with the liver, the animals that were eating one meal with really high protein actually had bigger livers. Not like a huge amount and not something that I would consider unsafe, but it was a statistically significant difference. And so to me, at least, like if I'm trying to explain like no difference in lean body mass, but a difference in these hind limb weights, maybe there's some like sequestering of, that's fueling a little bit more protein synthesis of the splanchnic tissues rather than, because you're capping out skeletal muscle protein synthesis. And we do know that the splanchnic tissues are more sensitive or have a greater rate of protein synthesis per day. Like the rate of skeletal muscle protein synthesis in humans is about like 1% per day. So it takes like 100 days to turn over, skeletal muscle. Whereas like your entire gut, your entire GI will turn itself over in like 2 to 3 days, right? So really, and the liver also has a very high amount of protein synthesis, which is one of the reasons it's actually one of the most metabolically active organs. So all that to say, there's been one human study that showed something similar. And then there's been a couple others that didn't. And then in the intermittent fasting studies, which is maybe a good tool to look at compared to continuous feeding, one thing I will say is it looks like the 16-8 intermittent fasting style. There's been a couple studies with Grant Tinsley, and this is something I've changed my mind on as well. Grant Tinsley has done a couple studies where they used the 16-8 protocol. They had them train during their feeding window, and they had them eat, I think it was at least 3 protein-containing meals during that 8 hours.
These are humans?
These are humans. Mm-hmm. And they saw no difference in lean body mass at the end of the study compared to people who were eating as many times as they wanted throughout the day. Now, if you look at some of the more extreme forms of fasting, like alternate day fasting or like 22-2 or 24, there are some studies where you do start to see differences in lean body mass. So my suspicion is, and I'm just guessing, so this is tenuous. My suspicion is probably if you're getting like 2 to 3 like high quality protein meals in a day, you're getting the vast majority of the benefits of protein. The most important thing is getting enough total. And then secondarily, trying to get, at least 2 or 3 meals with high quality protein in. But if you're going like pretty extreme with like alternate day fasting or, maybe only 1 meal a day, then I think there may be some effects on lean body mass. But again, these can be mitigated as well if you're doing, hard resistance training. Typically, that is the biggest lever in terms of lean body mass. Yes, protein distribution may make a difference, but I'm trying to put it in context so people don't feel like they need to go out and eat, 4 meals a day. But again, so what I would say is like some of the more milder forms of, time restricted eating appear to be fine for lean body mass. Now, the caveat is the following. One of the nice things about animal studies is when you consider if you want to have a high subject number, high level of control, and a long duration, it's pretty much your only option, right? So I have in our research review reps, I created a Venn diagram, which basically is like 3, circles crossing over. One is study duration, one is level of control, and the other one is subject number. And to get all 3 of those circles to cross over, it almost has to be in animals.
Right.
So
in reps, it's a newsletter or a book?
So it's our monthly research review.
Great.
So every month we review like 5 studies that come out in fitness and nutrition. Like we'll usually do at least 1 nutrition, 1 training, and 1 supplement per month.
We will put a link to where people can sign up. This is a sign up format. Great.
Yep. So it's a subscription-based service. So basically, when people might look at like my study, well, why did you see a difference in muscle weights, whereas some of these other studies don't see a difference? I weighed out every single meal for 11 weeks, And keep in mind that 11 weeks in a rodent's lifespan is a really long time. That's about an eighth of their total lifespan. So is it that there's no effect, or is it that the effect is relatively small and would take a really long time and very high level of control to see in humans? I don't know, but I think what I would say relatively confidently is if you're going to do like a 16-8 intermittent fasting, you're probably fine, especially, and again, what is the goal, right? Like if you're a bodybuilder looking to be the most massive person you possibly can, or you're a football player, or you're in some field that having as much lean body mass as possible is really important for you, then I would say, well, you're not really gaining a whole lot by doing some form of time-restricted eating.
I think most of the people listening to this do not fall into that category.
Right.
I think most people want to maintain or lose weight. They'd like to perhaps add a bit of quote-unquote shape or muscle to specific areas of their body and lose body fat.
Right, and I think your normal forms of time-restricted eating are probably perfectly fine for that, right? And again, I don't want somebody to think, well, I do, alternate day fasting, there's no point to me resistance training because I'm going to lose muscle mass. No. You can still build muscle doing that. You just might not build as much muscle as you would if you were eating in a more traditional format. But if that's something that works for you and your goals, and especially if it's fat loss or controlling your calories, then again, it's about the hierarchy of what's important, right? So to answer your question, I do think that timing and frequency matters a little, not so much frequency, but distribution more so. So I think the distribution matters, but it's a much smaller lever than just getting enough total protein in. And then as far as like animal versus plant, I used to be in the camp of there's no way somebody can build as much muscle on a plant-based diet. And now I think I've come back to you can, it just requires a little bit more planning. And I don't want to say always, but it's very difficult to do without an isolated source of protein. So unless you're going to supplement with an isolated plant source of protein, it's very difficult to get enough without going over on total calories, because you can figure that, especially like take somebody who may be calorically restricted, trying to get enough protein from whole intact plant sources. So you've got a few different things working against you. One, the sources of protein you're consuming also have carbohydrate and or fat. Two, it's a less bioavailable form of protein. And three, it's a lower quality of protein in terms of it has typically less leucine, less branched amino acids, and less essential amino acids.
You answered the question that I almost interrupted you to ask, which was, does it boil down to the leucine content? And it sounds like that is one of the components, and that a lot of the vegan and vegetarian sources of excellent protein, that excellent protein vegetarian or vegan source is co-packaged with calories from carbohydrates and or fat that make it hard to stay under the caloric threshold. Whereas a steak is, and obviously people might want to avoid that for ethical reasons,
sure,
but that's a different matter entirely. But a steak or a piece of chicken or an egg is, well, an egg, has a yolk, which is, there's fat there, but is almost a pure protein fat source. There's no carbohydrate along for the ride.
Right. So I think what I would say is that, you can do it takes a little more planning. And you're almost always, if you're a vegan, especially, you're going to be better off like supplementing with some isolated form of protein, or vegan form of protein. Now, this is where it gets into, people say, well, what about the limiting amino acids and those sorts of things? It's a consideration. Some of the better forms of vegan protein in terms of amino acid content are like soy. Now, I hear everybody screaming online about their testosterone levels. In terms of actual outcomes and looking at testosterone, there was a recent meta-analysis looking at soy, and I think if it's your only source of protein, then maybe the dosage is high enough to cause some weird effects.